All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the Health Made Simple show. I'm Dr. Bart, and today I have an incredible guest with me. So, although this is the first time we are face to face, you and I feel like I know you, which is awesome. We are part of a group. I think we have a lot of similar philosophies, most likely, and I plan on dragging everything I possibly can out of you today. Kyle, the little secret behind it. So, I'm an absolute MMA avid fan. And I've participated certainly on a professional level, but for probably the last 20 years. I've been involved in MMA, had an opportunity to corner a couple guys in the UFC and just fun stuff. So I knew your name way prior to us being in a group. I've seen a lot of your fights, phenomenal. For folks, I don't know if you'll be able to get this from this podcast, but this man in front of me, what are you, about 6'4", 230?
Dropped some pounds, but that's very close. I'm down to 226. So I dropped all the way down to 222. And then I've been training a little differently lately. And now I've put some more muscle back on. So still trying to find a happy medium.
Yeah. Happy medium. So ultimately that means he's a large, massive human being that has the skill set to literally fight on the highest level in the world, in the UFC. And I'm going to dive into that in just your bio in just a moment. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for your time. And there's so many things I want to kind of dive in here today. So Kyle, thank you for being here. We're going to dive into everything from a little bit of farming to some cutting edge science about nutrition, hopefully. And then also what it means to day getting ourselves prepared for the unknown. So thank you for being here.
Hell yeah. It's my pleasure, brother.
All right. So I'm going to give a little bio of you and maybe you can just fill in the details here. So this is what we know. Kyle was a walk-on football player way back in the day, ASU. And I mentioned that because that immediately tells me a little about your mindset. You don't walk on a team, especially a high-level college football team, and think, hey, man, I'm good enough to play. You have to have a certain mindset that goes with that to do that. So hats off to you there. And then what I really known you for the last several years, or, maybe I think you've been probably out of fighting for half 5-10 years or something like that. Anyways, Kyle fought in the UFC. And for those of you who don't know the UFC, it means you just haven't been listening to my podcast that I talk about all the time. I love fight analogies. And here's why. Because to put yourself in the situation to be a fighter, and this is one of the most unique things I find about men and women who do that. You're putting yourself in one of the most high-risk situations to fail. Never mind injury and all that goes with it, but you prepare for ungodly amounts of time in your life, and you put so much in the willingness. And this is the unique part about the psyche of fighters, I find, that they're willing to put themselves in a situation of failure. And you might think, well, they're badasses, they all, but no, listen, every one of them is badass. Even the one that loses, we thought, they suck. No, they didn't suck. They're awesome. And my most fascinating thing is the mindset it takes to constantly put yourself in a situation that there's a high risk and a probability of failure. So in one of my first questions I have for you, how important? So I want you to fill in your bio as well. So because here's the other fascinating part. When I look forward, I'm looking into your more details now, somehow you've taken this badassery, I'm going to say, and this willingness to risk emotionally, which I think is a huge part of it. And then forward, I see that all of a sudden you're taking care of yourself. You're probably looking through a different lens, and you're a director of optimal health and optimization at Onnit, which is a massive, huge, supplement company. So you've obviously dove deep into the science and learning how your body and other people's bodies and their minds work even more and more. So I want to dive into that. But so let me pass it back to you, Kyle. Tell me a little about Kyle Kingsbury. Who is he today? Who was he maybe a decade or two ago?
Yeah, it's been a fast shifting trajectory. I always kind of scoff and laugh at the 5-year to 10-year time capsule. You write down where you'd be in 5 years, stick it in the ground and dig it back up. It's like, there's no point where I would have been remotely fucking close to that. Even looking back at fighting, I retired in 2014. If I had done a time capsule in 2013, I would not have predicted being out of the UFC a year later, figuring out what I wanted to do. Fighting for me was really my second mountain. It was my secondary education. It was my post-college deep dive into all things performance. And when that shifted, even before I got out and I started to transition, because I probably had one leg out, from 2012 to 2014, just uncertain. I always told myself, if I drop below 500, I'm out. Doesn't matter what level it is. If it's Rage in the Cage, King of the Cage, it's not baseball. And, at light heavyweight and heavyweight where I fought, there's no guys in there that you're playing pity pat with you. You're going to take some lumps. And even just the training, I trained at American Kickboxing Academy with Cain Velasquez, Daniel Cormier, Luke Rockhold. Those are my teammates my entire career, and I've had other guys like Chuck Liddell and Big Nog and Anderson Silva, Lyoto Machida. Like, I've trained with some of the best guys in the world and been very fortunate for that. I also sparred with fucking Daniel Cormier, Luke Rockhold, and Cain Velasquez 3 days a week until we started to tone it down. So I probably had more damage done in the training room than in the cage. Mm-hmm. And that was a factor for me and why I wanted to get out. Obviously, I had nothing to show for it leaving the UFC. I had no money stashed aside, just debt really. And but it was something I loved, and it gave me a reason to take care of myself. So again, I'm in the UFC. I'm not as good as Cormier. I can't eat Popeyes chicken while I'm playing NBA 2K in between practice. I had to study as much as I could. Recovery, breath work, hot and cold therapy, anything that really moved the bar, mobility stuff. And what was cool is because I was in the UFC, I got a chance to meet a lot of these people like Dr. Kelly Starrett and Wim Hof and all these great thinkers. And really, they've had such an impact on me. Gabby Reese and Laird Hamilton, phenomenal folks, down in Southern California. And I've been able to draw from them. And then, like I said, as I started to transition away from the sport, it became more about longevity and healing injuries and, TBI, CTE, like what are the best ways to bounce back from that. And got plugged in with Dr. Dan Engel, who wrote the Concussion Repair Manual. He's a dear friend, and many other people. Even got to meet my mentor, Paul Chek, who's somebody that's really changed my life many times over. But I think, if there's one big driver there that kind of steered me away from fighting and back to nature, it was likely my use with plant medicines. And I had a boxing coach who passed away, Wheatsy, Arturo Mata. He was a cut man in the UFC for many years as well. A lot of people, if you watch my old fights, you see him in my corner. Rogan's even teasing him. The first time I won Fight of the Night, he goes, how bad you want it? How bad you want it? And Rogan just starts repeating that. How bad you want it? How bad you want it? And it just cracks me up because he was awesome. But he was a mestizo Aztec, and he'd bring me out for sweat lodges and eventually working with psilocybin and then ayahuasca. And all of those things just, unveiled a different level of reality to me that I didn't know was possible, and really gave me the visceral understanding of what many spiritual teachings were trying to point towards. And from there, I couldn't help but want to be immersed in nature. We started gardening in my mom's backyard when I was fighting on a quarter acre. I'd started, diving deep into regenerative agriculture. I took my son out to Rome Ranch, the Force of Nature guys who have the regenerative bison farm in Fredericksburg. And he sat on my lap while this bison went down at 20 yards in front of us. We got to go pray for the animal and thank her. And that's what went into my wife's body while our daughter was in the womb. That's like literally what put her together in those early stages. So to have that reconnection to the animals has been huge, and to the land itself. And, it was 2020, and forgive me if I'm getting too far ahead, but, plants redirect me to nature. 2020 happens, and I'm like, we really ought to have our own land. We really ought to be growing our own food. Like we should be right. We should make sure that we have these things secure as a dad, so I don't have to fucking stay awake all night. And I think, fear was a driving catalyst in many ways positively. But before that, prior to that, just the reconnection to nature and fighting did give me a sense of purpose, in that I had to be my best. I had to do everything right. I had to do breath work. I had to learn meditation. I had to learn all these things just to be good enough to stay in the UFC.
Wow. A lot there. So with all that being said, a lot of that, and you mentioned the word fear. So often we think fear, then we have to stay away from it. But man, fear can be a driving force. So my question for you, I'd love you to kind of unwrap the idea of showing up or being in the game. And I'm going to preface that. So I'm in healthcare for this 27 years. And one of the challenges that I recognize is that often people will tiptoe right up to the line of they gain all the information. And nowadays, information's at fingertips, right? Even with chat GPT and all these different things, it's not a lack of information we have. And I get asked all the time, do I think it's going to change the healthcare world, all this new information? No, because and the reason I say that, it's the information is available. But often what I recognize, and not for everybody, but a lot of the times I see, is that there is this this characteristic that happens where we're really willing to toe the line right up before the risk. And the risk being that if I commit to this, I might fail. And therefore I won't do it because it's a little more comfortable to just staying over here. Now, Kyle, this could be as simple as a commitment to an exercise program. It could be a commitment to just like, hey, I'm going to take carbs out this week, whatever. Doing what you've done, getting in the cage with someone, making a commitment to let that door lock, right? Or to make weight, or to then commit to a farming. How important is it for us, just as humans, to be willing to get into that space of that willingness? It's just getting in the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's why entire books have been written about it. The obstacle is the way comes to mind. And to me, that's a very, kind of low-hanging fruit, elementary concepts for people that haven't done the shit that I've done. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that need that entry point. Dan John's one of my favorite strength coaches of all time. He co-authored with Pavel Tsatsouline the book Easy Strength. I'm always referencing that for people, whether they're pro athletes or retired athletes or just injured folks that want to train better. It's an amazing book. And one of the things Dan John says is the difference between the person that wins the championship and the person that comes close to winning the championship is the person that wins the championship just showed up. Didn't matter if they were sick. Didn't matter if they got hurt. They were always there, right? You're in the gym. They're immersed in the thing. Whatever they can do, they do, right? And secondary to that is Bruce Lee. It's not enough to know, we must do. So, I mean, we're literally in this place in human history now where all of the knowledge is right there. And it does require, just showing up requires enough humility to suck at something for a while sometimes, right? To not get it right. And I see this all the time. I've got friends, they made their way up to, white belt, 3 stripes, or even some of them got their blue belts, and they quit because they just got tired of sucking at the thing. It took them too long to become good at it. And, I still get my ass kicked in jiu-jitsu constantly. I got my black belt in 2016. It's just a fact. It's a matter of fact with that sport. And it's incredibly humbling. And there's a benefit to that. If you can say yes to that, there's a benefit to that. If I can leave my ego aside and take my ego with me, that's the thing that's going to keep me coming back and trying to get better. But at the same time, know where is the right relation with that thing when I'm training and competing. And I think that's been really beneficial for me too. But I do see what you're talking about. And it can be as simple as like somebody telling me, man, I tried that keto thing for 10 days and it didn't work. It's like, oh, you tried it for 10 days, huh? That didn't work. Like, okay, maybe a little bit longer. And that's not to say that ketogenic diets or low carb diets are right for everyone, but metabolic resets, as we can talk about, those are incredibly beneficial and for everybody, whether you are more equatorial diet type, looking at Weston A. Price's work, if you're closer to the equator and you did better with small game, fish and fowl, low fats, and had higher carbohydrates year round, you're still in a category that could likely reduce carb intake for a week or two, reset the body, and then come back to it. But yeah, to your point, I mean, I really do see it everywhere. It's kind of like you unlock a system in your mind, and then you can see its application on different things. And you can also see where so many people do kind of get right up to there and then they back off. Like, oh, I gave it a shot. They don't really invest fully in it. And I think a part of that is a lack of wanting to fail or a lack of, they don't want to suck for a while.
Yeah. I think what you said there, that having that experience becomes the critical part of it. And you mentioned, many quotes there. I know when I started off in jiu-jitsu, I would compete, and Kyle, I basically, all I did was lose. When I say that, I mean that what it's like you lose all the time in the gym or on the mats in practice. I was winning at my level in the gym, like with my team. And then I would go to these tournaments and I couldn't win a single match. And it was mind-boggling. When I got into martial arts a little bit later in my life, and it was mind-boggling to me. Literally, I would be great in the gym, but something was taking place. And when I say every single time I went to a tournament, I lost. First match, done. You're out. Kick later, dude. And fortunately, I had a great coach. And this is why I think mentors and coaches and people with experience are so important in life. So I was at this point, I was like, fuck this. I'm not doing this anymore. Like this. And I came up with all the excuses. My coach said, look around. He said, you see all your teammates? And the funny thing was my teammates weren't there. And he said, they're not competing today. He's like, you are. He's like, you're having the experience. So when you go back there, they're all going to be wondering what happened. And you're the only one who's going to be able to experience and share that with them. You're going to learn from your losses and learn from the mistakes and learn from the falls, even though it's going to be super uncomfortable along the way. So I love how you put that, because that's exactly what happened. And in the time, I got to tell you, that sucked. Man, I just couldn't. It took me years to figure out, how do I actually win a jiu-jitsu match or an expedition or something in order to just get to that next level. So let's back up a little bit. So you talked about plant medicines. I'm curious, there's so much data and so much information about it. If you had to narrow it down and say, here was Kyle, who was a successful, hardworking man. We'll say successful. You got to the pinnacle, right, in the UFC, the highest level of competitive professional fighting you could possibly get there. So that by itself, you could say that's successful. What is it that was exposed, if we can, if you don't mind sharing, because I know that's going to be personal. What was it exposed once you started doing some plant medicines? And I assume you did it with some experience and some safe mechanisms around you. What were some of the experiences that you had with the plant medicines that you didn't have?
Yeah, that's a podcast in and of itself. But I think, loosely, it's one of the things too you learn is that it's almost like explaining your dream to somebody. If they've never done plant medicines, you're like, well, let me tell you about this dream I had, except it's the most real dream you've ever had in your entire life. And it actually matters to you, and it stands apart from any other dreams that you've had. But as you explain it to the person, they're like, yeah, that's a cool dream you had. Like there's no way to really understand it, unless you've gone through it. And so with that, mostly the key takeaways were, I had not felt a sense of peace in my entire life, like the sense of peace I got through throwing up all the shit that I had locked inside of me, and there's layers to it, and layers and layers and layers to it. So it's not like nobody goes to do plant medicines. They're like, I'm healed, I'm perfect, I got everything, I'm manifesting my whole fucking dream world. It doesn't work that way by design. And at the same time, I found my center. I found the ability to find peace and quiet on the internal, and to know myself differently, not through comparison, not through how intelligent I look, not through what other people think, but just to feel comfortable in my own fucking skin for probably the first time in my life. And that's one of an infinite number of layers to it. Another layer would be witnessing nature as consciousness, witnessing everything, and Paul Selig says, there's a lot of spiritual teachers that talk about this. Paul Selig says, all is of or nothing is, meaning all is of the divine or nothing is, because even from a universal standpoint, it is one song. We are the living creation of one thing, and there is nothing that's inanimate. They might have varying degrees of consciousness, varying degrees of vibratory field, but all of it is awake, all of it is alive. And whatever soul I have, there's soul and consciousness in all of these things that I look out in the world and see. And to hear that, I've read about shit like that, and it's like, all right, cool, maybe. But to experience that, in a variety of ways, and to have experienced that over and over again. I mean, I remember walking back from the bathroom and I heard feed me, something whispered, feed me. And I looked to my right and it was a fucking tree. And I was like, what? And then immediately just dumped everything, all my insides came out on this tree. And I fell to all fours, and I'm looking at this thing just shaking, like, did you just talk to me? And then again, and I go again, and I was like, wow. It's like, there is a way where we can come, and Graham Hancock talks about this. A lot of the great psychonauts talk about this. If the brain is a receiver or an antenna, we're locked into this very fine wavelength for consciousness. It's one radio station. And when we take these things, we can open that bandwidth up, so we have access to more than one radio station at the same time, and see what many indigenous people would consider the magical realm, the tree beings, the different beings, and to understand these things, even without, going into sun worship or any of these other things, but just understanding that thing is alive and it has a power and an influence over us, and that we can have a dialogue with it. That was a massive shift for me, from standard, Western religious upbringing. And I mean, the list goes on and on. So you can just jump back in here, whatever you want. But those two are probably the first two biggest ones: my own inner peace, and then two, seeing the world completely differently.
I think that's amazing. And one of the things you said there is something that jumped out about you to me, and it was that you used the word peace. So if you look at you from the outside, you see this large human being, big man, and you kind of have this level of badassery that goes with you, right? And then when I listen to your podcast, and folks, if you haven't already, go to Spotify, follow Kyle Kingsbury podcast. Is that right?
Yep.
Phenomenal. And here's a theme that I get there. One, just FYI, awesome job on your podcast. Amazing guests, the information, like cutting edge, absolutely love it. But there's this theme, and I'm guessing, just listen to what you just said there, it's very organic at this point, that you have this dude who's total badassery. And I have a little insight of some other things that you do. And yet through all of your podcasts, Kyle, I get this sense of the grounding layer, the message, self-love, peace, kindness, oneness. And it's very, very obvious in it. So my question would be this to you. Can you have both? And is it important to have that badassery and be completely a loving, kind, peaceful human being that connects all as one?
That's a great question. And I think Jordan Peterson, I'm going to mess this up. Maybe I could find my dad to just send, Jordan Peterson's famous for saying like a man, or anybody for that matter, like Rose Namajunas has certainly earned her badassery. Like when you elevate yourself to a level where you're no longer afraid and you choose to be a gentleman, you choose to be kind, you have full access there, right? The weakling isn't making a choice to be a pacifist. Mm-hmm. He has no other option, right? Mm-hmm. So you do have, but through exercising these things, the skill sets, you have the option to do what you want in the world. And it's fairly clear at that point what you want to do. You want to love, you want to do the right thing. And that's plant medicines aside. I mean, you look at a lot of black belts in jiu-jitsu and there's like a certain aloofness to them. There's a certain calmness to them. Any chip they had on their shoulder was ironed out years prior to getting that black belt. And, I read books like The Way of the Warrior Kid by Jocko Willink. It's a great book set because it really describes what happens on the mats. But if your kid was getting bullied and you put them in jiu-jitsu, there's the answer. It's mm-hmm. also the same answer for the bully. You take the bully into jiu-jitsu and they no longer want to bully. So it's a very weird thing, mm-hmm. but I find that to be important. And, they're the old adage, I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Yeah. Like I love the idea. It does help me sleep better at night, knowing that I keep my blade sharp. I don't have any plans on fighting again, but I still go to jiu-jitsu a couple days a week. I still go to boxing once a week. We spar. There's very few things that I can do that elevate me to the level of readiness. And now, like the element of right now, all things, nothing else matters. Very few things, even in the gym, can bring me to that. I could be, trying to PR on back squat. I have to be right there. I have to have all of me there, but it's not the same as having someone throw a punch in my face. And I don't want brain damage. I don't want to continue to get beat up, but at the same time, I only get that from that exercise, right? Yeah. So I'm going to do that in the healthiest possible way that I can, just so I continue to see this coming at me and I continue to hone that. And there's a lot of transfer from these things. People talk about, the first time you find your center in an ice bath. And instead of, jumping in and go, oh, fuck, and trying to say, just, okay. Now I can slow it down. It might take you 30 seconds to a minute your first few times, but eventually you get in there and your body still recognizes how cold it is. It hasn't gotten warmer just because you've been in it every day. Your body just recognizes it and you can go to your center quicker. And what I found is that does translate to someone cutting you off in traffic. That does translate to your boss shitting on you in front of all your other employees, where you're just like, wow, this sucks, but I found my center in the ice bath and I can find my center right now. And same thing goes for boxing, and same thing goes with having a bigger, better athlete laying on your chest, putting all their weight into you, right? Can I find space to breathe in this shitty position and not freak out and just relax and remember whatever technique that I have left? Here's where my hands go. Here's where my legs go. Here's where my hips moved, and now take some of that pressure off me. All that translates. And so I like leaning into things like that. And I think that's the point of books like The Obstacle is the Way, is that there comes a certain point where you see that pattern. And the pattern is, if I say yes to this thing that's a little bit uncomfortable and I do it correctly, boom, that is going to have payoff in all other events in life.
I think that's significant right there, leaning into it and getting almost comfortable being uncomfortable. So on Saturdays I spar. And Kyle, it's interesting. So I'm a little older than you. I'm 53 years old. And so inevitably a lot of people right away jump to, oh my God, should you be taking head blows like that? Your doctor, aren't you smarter than that? And there's a yes, and you're absolutely right. We're safe. I got good training partners. Even though I will also say this, I'm nervous every Saturday going to sparring. Like I don't know if you are at this point, but I am every Saturday. I'm like, I got to center my ship here. And with that said, the idea, and that sparring could be anything, folks. That could be you going for your jog that you used to do. Often I will hear people talk about, I can't do this anymore. I'm getting too old. And that one, like it sinks in because I don't believe there's an age here. I think there's an experience. And I think there's more that happens as we compound interests. But the moment I choose, and I think this was kind of your point here, that I can't do those things or I have limitations and I'm not willing to put myself in those positions. And maybe I don't perform or you don't perform at the same level you once did. But the moment you surrender that, there's a little piece of you that you are letting go. And I like the way that you put that, saying that you just got to show up and be all in. And my guess is that you're not as fast or as whatever you were once at one time. And that doesn't matter. It's the fact that you are showing up. And I say that for everyone listening. So we have a lot of people looking for opportunities to, kind of hack their ways into future health and longevity, which I want to go there with you because I know that's kind of your expertise. That if we stop doing these things, we're going to get ourselves in a little bit of trouble. So you talked about longevity a little bit and that transition from always being in it and just not maybe considering the impact on your body as much. I think you broke your orbital bone once. You get face punched in, right?
Yep. That happened twice, same spot.
Okay.
Same eyeball.
Yeah. So here you are now, and you talk about longevity. So let's put some meat into that. When you think about practicing longevity, and it might be really simple, it might be deep, but what does longevity mean to you? And what are the things you're doing today that you're now thinking? Because I'm 53 and I'm thinking, how do I at least keep this health span? I don't care about quite frankly, the lifespan as much as I do the health span. How long can Bart stay strong, healthy, vibrant, energetic, balls to the wall? How can I do all these things? And for how long can I do that? What are you doing now that might have been different from before?
Yeah, that's loaded. And it's true. And the way you frame it is perfect because I don't think of this like Ray Kurzweil or Dave Asprey, where I want to live to 150 or 200 years old or upload my consciousness to a fucking machine. That's not it at all. But I want to operate the way that I operate within a percentage of that. I don't have any delusions of grandeur that at 80, I'm going to be like when I was 50. So you do lose a little bit along the way. I've had a knee injury for some time. I've been training around that, getting myself stronger as I work around that. And there's certain limitations. Instead of being able to run 3 to 5 days a week, I might have to jog once or twice a week right now. That's okay. I take what I can and I work around that. But really thinking about longevity, I like to think of Dr. Andy Galpin's work. And one of the things he said, there is if you don't use it, you lose it mentality. But you've got so many people like David Sinclair that are talking about which statin you should take and then resveratrol as, this magic bullet. You're going to take resveratrol and it's going to lengthen telomeres and, you clear out senescent cells. And I'm into that stuff too. I just had James Schmachtenberger on from Neurohacker Collective, who they did Qualia Mind and they have a Qualia Senolytic right now, which is like the best. It's the kitchen sinks of plants to help aid with senescent cells. That doesn't mean I don't fast on occasion, right? Like you better fast on occasion. It doesn't mean I don't get in the sauna and the ice bath. Like all that shit still applies. And so really when I think of longevity, one of the most important things I learned in jiu-jitsu when I was on The Ultimate Fighter, I watched Nogueira train with Anderson Silva and a bunch of great guys, and Lyoto Machida, he's training with these guys. I watched him train with Daniel Valverde for 90 minutes. All they did was fucking guillotines. And it was everything guillotine. It was guillotine sweep, Zolnogi, just like how to transition, where to get it. And they're trying to get these guillotines on each other. They're going full go, but somebody starts positionally with the guillotine. And I was like, why? I mean, I understand the guillotine is important, but like, you guys been fucking 90 minutes in that one position. He goes, oh, buddy, basics are everything. He said, he told that to me when I was a white belt. And I was like, damn, this is fucking former Pride World Champion, one of the all-time greats. Basics are everything, right? That's why they train that, right? So I think about that. When I think of health and longevity, the basics to me are very simple. Paul Chek did The Last 4 Doctors You'll Ever Need on ebook. He talks about Dr. Happiness, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Diet, and Dr. Movement. And they're the last 4 doctors you'll ever need. If you actually work with these 4 doctors, it turns out, sorry, Dr. Bart, you might not need other doctors. You know, you might be just fucking good without it. Dr. Movement is your movement practice, any which way you move, right? It's yoga, running, walking, being able to get up and down off the floor. Dr. Diet is anything you put in your body, supplements, water, food, any of that. And then, of course, Dr. Quiet is not just sleep, but it's also your yin practices. Do you do Tai Chi? Do you have yin yoga? Do you meditate? All that's a part of the Dr. Quiet. And then Dr. Happiness is not just your big vision of why you're here, your vocation, the legacy you want to leave. It's also how you fill your cup each day. What little things do I enjoy that I can do on a daily fucking basis? That way my soul is always fed and I remain happy, because that's the fuel source for me to want to take care of myself. It's not an obligation for me to eat a certain way. I found ways to make, you know, the very best grass-fed burgers with bacon and cheese and fucking, we got our own eggs from the farm now. Like, I can make great food taste delicious. That's perfect for my body. And so that's not a hassle to do that. But the commitment and the discipline makes it easier when I enjoy it, right? If I enjoy the thing, I can come back to it. So I think of those last 4 doctors. And I also think, you know, when you look at guys like David Sinclair and these different people, and I'm not trying to shit on them, but you know, the guy runs once a week or once every 2 weeks. Dave Asprey's talking about, you know, when he was on Rogan's back in the day, you know, doing a kettlebell workout on a Vibe plate for 15 minutes once every 2 weeks and acting like that ain't going to cut it, dude. Like, and if you enjoy the thing, it shouldn't be a hassle. Some people don't like lifting weights, but they enjoy running and yoga. Cool. And maybe find, you know, that if you do some type of weight training, it'll improve your yoga and improve your running. There are ways that we can grab the things that we don't like and fold them into the things we like if they help us improve the things we actually love. So I look at things like that from a longevity standpoint. You know, Andy Galpin was saying, people are looking at telomeres, they're looking at all these different things. Grip strength, massive indicator of how long you live and how well you live into your age. Your ability to get up and down off the floor, right? We know a lot of people get to a certain age, we go from chairs to couches to that geyser tub that opens up with a door and you just sit in the geyser tub and fill it up, right? Like, this shit exists. It absolutely exists. And so most people don't get up and down off the floor. And Kelly Starrett was big on this, you know, is a huge influence on me, along with Aaron Alexander. How much stuff can you put on the ground? Like, we have our dining table is like a Japanese or a Thai kitchen table. It's on the ground. We sit on yoga bolsters and we're all the way on the ground with our ass slightly raised on a 4-inch cushion. That's how we eat every night. We have a lot of our beds, especially with the kids little. We're going to, you know, moving in this house at the farm. We're finally going to buy, you know, like bed furniture to raise the beds up, because all of them are floor level, right? They're floor level, just like in Japan. And that forces us to get down and get out. It allows us to roll out of bed real easy. And everything is an invitation as well. Aaron taught me that, you know, like, we have hardwood floors on the downstairs and they're pretty hard. It's not fun to get down there and play and wrestle with the kids. So we put 100 square feet of MMA puzzle mats and then a big rug over that. So it wouldn't look like we have, you know, an MMA fucking ring in the middle of the house. It looks like a nice rug, but it's highly cushioned, you know, so we can play yoga, we can do board games, we can wrestle, we can do all these things right in the center of the living room. Like, there's an invitation to get on the ground there. Right. And so I think, you know, convenience is a big one. Momentum is a big one. And just chipping at these things, right? If I just show up every day and I do a little bit, little football quote from Lou Holtz that I love. Yard by yard, life is hard, but inch by inch, life's a cinch. And so it really is just about chipping away at these things. And if we do a little deposit in the happiness bank, I go to bed a little bit earlier each night, you know, sacrifice some shitty TV show I don't need to see to get a little bit more sleep. All that pays dividends. You know, there's compounding interest on all this shit. And so, yeah, really, when I think about longevity, I think of the basics. I think of what am I putting in my body? I'm not thinking about biohacks and shit like that. I'm really not thinking about, you know, what superfood is out there that I need to take in. You know, like I was reminded from a buddy of mine, Dr. Nathan Riley, the holistic OBGYN. Like, he's really, you know, focuses a lot on men and women getting ready for pregnancy, what that looks like going through and natural birthing process and all this stuff. And he's phenomenal. And so I was thinking he was going to tell me about some plant. And he goes, oysters. And I was like, of course it's oysters, right? And he's like, you know, more zinc, copper, selenium, and iron than anything other than your food source. There's not even, people talk about organ meats. I love organ meats. I love Paul Saladino. Oysters shit on organ meat. They're that loaded, you know, they're just loaded. So a couple days a week, we do oysters and some grain-free crackers, and that's my lunch for the day, and it's like, there's a superfood. But again, it folds back into the basics. What am I putting in my body? How often am I moving? On days where I get slammed, because I got plenty of days. Like I said, I'm kind of a jack of all trades, but an ace in none. I've got the podcast I've been doing for 6 years, farm manager at this farm with Aubrey, Gardeners of Eden. I'm a coach in Fit for Service, and I'm a coach privately, right? So those are 4 hats that I wear outside of being a dad and a husband. And time is stretched thin, just like it is for you. So I'm looking for different ways that I can get the best bang for my buck in the shortest amount of time possible. And I've been able to find some of those. So that's been really important for me. But it still is, just fucking do it. Doesn't matter if you have 10 minutes or an hour, just do it.
Yeah, I love what you're saying here, and I think it's essentially my Health Made Simple show over this last couple of years really been built off of that. It's how we move, eat, and think. And if you can get some momentum rolling, and it doesn't matter how much, but just do a little bit. Get up every day, do something for 5 minutes, just move, and get to the point where, yes, that uncomfortableness becomes ritual, becomes discipline at some point. And I think part of that is going back to Paul Checks, and he's a big part of my background as well. Using those 4 doctors and just often just checking in, right? Like, how am I doing with Dr. Quiet? Like, that's a huge one in today's culture. And if we're not quiet, we don't really get to kind of have those moments of, what am I doing all this for? Like, where am I headed with this action today? Where's this, where's this adding up to, whatnot? And with that being said, how important, Kyle, do you think that was a beautiful dissertation? Like, and for everyone listening, foundations, we can't skip them. Yes, there's so many of these amazing. So this half of my career right now, Kyle, you'll get a kick out of this, is, Doc, what do you think about blank? And, everything. And I appreciate it and I love it. And I dive deep just like you do in it. And it always goes back to the foundations. How you moving? How you eating? How you thinking? You getting some rest? Those fundamentals will never be. And I think if you avoid them, you got a hole in your game. I really do. I think if you avoid sleeping, you have a big hole game. If you avoid putting your body under a little bit of physical duress, exercise, putting some muscles back onto your body, because we're going to lose them if we're not maintaining them. So I think if you're lacking in one of those categories, a little bit of hole in your game, and you just start small and keep rolling with it. So with that being said, now let's just shift a little bit, because I think this is real. And I think sometimes it's easier not to look. Okay. Not sometimes, all the time. It's just easier not to look. And that could be as fundamental as, so I do functional medicine. So we look at a lot of labs, but I'll tell people every time, I don't need them. You and I sit down for an hour, have a conversation, not even that, probably could take about 10 minutes. We can really get to the point here. Where do we need to move the needle in order to make a healthier person? So we have labs. And then this will be a little shift from what we've talked about before. How important do you think it is just to look on the outside of what's going on in the world? Or do you think it's easier to keep our head in the sand and just put our blinders on?
Well, there's balance to everything and nuance to all of it, right? And I've been... let me interrupt real quickly.
Okay. One of the reasons I'm asking you this question, because I think you do an amazing job. We are part of a group that we're looking at things, but then I watch your podcast and I'm like, wait a minute, the energy that he's able to put into both of these, quite frankly, it's impressive. And so that's why I'm asking that question.
I like that. Well, we're on the inside of something that's not, public. So it's we do get to see different things, and even the other group, which I think I left, you might've left, that became a little bit more doomsday-ish, it was kind of like at a certain point, it just becomes too much, and so I think, to explain the group, it's a practical prep. Like, we're just preparing for anything that may go down, and whatever that looks like. It could be how you fucking kill chickens, as a homesteader. It could be, what, if you want to press your own bullets, what are the supplies you need? Who's got the best book? Is it Hornady? Is it someone else? It's very simple shit like that. Tucker Mack's a good buddy. He's been on the podcast. He's doing meat birds. We're not doing meat birds, but I love eating chicken. And he needed a new ram for his sheep herd. And he knows we both goes to the same guys to get Austin Dillon, the regenerative renegade, who has Counterculture Farms here in Texas. He's doing the very best in regenerative for cows, sheep, goats. And so I get to trade him a ram that we don't want anymore for some meat birds. Like that's a way we prep. That's a way we build community and things like that. But I think, to your question, Should we stick our head in the sand and not pay attention? Absolutely not. This is a critical time in human history where we have to pay attention. And at the same time, you can fucking die looking at everything there is that's negative right now. Like I used to laugh at my parents, like, why do you watch the news? Why do you watch the news? There's nothing but negative shit every day. And then the way social media has changed, it's like, oh shit, I'm watching the news. I'm watching the news every fucking day, right? And in a way, that's kind of how empire, if you want to call it that, has hoodwinked us and taken our attention even further down these rabbit holes. So there's always, to talk about Dr. Quiet, talk about flow state, any of these things where I find my center and operate from that. It becomes imperative. If I'm going to jump outside of myself and look at something happening in another country, or look at something happening in this country, but states away from me, I have to come back to center. I have to bring that home. How do I land that in my body? And just like video games, I used to love video games when I was in college. Tim Kennedy talks about this, in the video game, it's like Dr. Robert Sapolsky's Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. The zebra gets chased by the lion. First thing it does if it escapes is it immediately shakes its body, like full body Kundalini. Then it'll go back to drinking water, fucking eating, doing whatever it was going to do. But it's got to move that energy through its body first. If we're playing Call of Duty all day long, that energy is building, right?
Yeah.
But we're not putting it anywhere. If I'm online, that energy is building, right? If I'm reading about the third largest dairy farm in Texas just blew up with a mushroom cloud. This was in April. I got to move that. I can't fucking sit with that and try to think that I'm going to go to bed at night and sleep fine. Immediately my mind will spiral. Anyone's normal mind would spiral. What does that mean for dairy? What if my kids drink milk and we don't go the conventional route? But what if they blow up my local dairy farm that's got only 300 cows and it's all Jersey cows and raw milk? Like, there's questions that emerge from situations like that. And I think that the same thing applies though. Can I have a relationship with these people where I can go direct to my farmers? That's a big one. That solves a lot of riddles around food. If they require a Vax Pass or don't let a certain group of people get into grocery stores, am I still going to be able to eat and feed my kids? Yes. Right. So those are little things. That's practical preparation, right? Little things that you would do just so you can sleep a little bit better at night. And the side effect of that is I have a deeper connection to my food, a deeper connection to nature, a deeper connection to my neighbors. It's a vertical system, right? It's like vertical farming, but it's vertically integrated where, within 30 minutes, I can find everything that I need, right? And that's an important thing to have as well. So, there is a balance point is what I'm getting to with how much of this stuff I actually take in and how I digest, process, and eliminate that. If I'm constantly stuffing my face with good food and I'm not moving, my body's going to get backed up. I have to allow time and I have to allow my body to go through its natural digestive processes. The same thing goes for anything digitally that I'm consuming. If I'm consuming a lot of information, good or bad, no matter how you want to fold that in, I have to give my body and mind the space to process, digest, and eliminate what I don't need. And the takeaway from that is, what is my action? What's important now? Like the old WIN acronym. What's important now, right? What's important now for me? There may be something that I could do that's important for me to do now based on what I'm seeing in the world. And there may not, right? And that's the importance of like the serenity prayer. Like I'm asking God for the wisdom to know the difference between the shit that I have control over and the stuff that I have no control over. And with that, I'm going to focus on what I have control over. And as it turns out, I have a lot more control over the things that impact me than anyone else does. I have the most control over that if I take that responsibility. So there usually are action items and things that I can do that allow me to sleep better. And in that, there are wonderful side effects from those experiences. But I can't stay in the dark rabbit holes too long because it'll eat me alive. And I think it's done that with a lot of people. You look at guys like Alex Jones or David Icke, these different people, like their bodies are physically contorted because of the amount of negativity they've had to hold and carry. Yeah. And it's not saying what they're doing is right or wrong. It's just saying like they haven't moved that through them, and you can see it in their physical structure.
Man, I think that's such a beautiful way you articulated that to recognize it, to observe that we kind of have to pay attention, and that could help us drive your actions. And, I think for me and you, like, yeah, that having that information helps me put into action certain things. It might actually create a little motivation or a strategy that I might have taking care of my physical body. a good, both of us have a friend in there called Clay Martin, and I had the opportunity to go out to Tucker's place about a year ago and do some shooting, and it was hot as shit and whatnot. And Clay was saying, yeah, just imagine this, a lot hotter, and you had to walk, 10 miles with all your gear and all. Some I was thinking, how? What? No. He's like, well, then just think about if you had to go get some water at your neighbor's place that was 4 miles down the road and carry that water back, in terms of physical fitness. Or if you had to like go farming for a day or whatnot, and then start to put those thoughts into action. Or maybe, so I think about it all the time. I've got a bunch of dogs. I got 8 dogs. And they're about 50 pounds each. And I think if they're injured and I'm out hiking, could I carry this dog back 2 miles out of the woods? So those are subtleties that might think us or just drive a little bit more action. So I love the way you kind of put that. I think we have to look. And I think it's foolish not to, because then we might not be prepared the moment that happens, but also not to live in that moment. And you're right. I see physically the people that show up that are so far down that rabbit hole that, of course, their body is going to be expressing disharmonies. And I would say anyone's listening right now, if you got disharmony, dis-ease or displacement of some of your health in your body, look at the things that you got to let go, which I want to jump to this. This kind of off. I listened to one of your podcasts not too long ago. I don't know who you were talking to. You talked a little bit about parasitic energy. I don't know if you remember that conversation, but I loved it because I think it's so relevant. Just to your point where you're talking about there, could be digital, could be people. Give me a minute on that. Share what that means to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it means a lot. There's I'll share with you, and you can share with the listeners. This guy who passed away was an indigenous guy named John Trudell, and he's on Spotify, he's on iTunes, he's on all the major things. But he has a spoken word called DNA. Descendant, now ancestor. And it's a lot of poetry, but it's so beautiful. It's like George Carlin knew it, and George Carlin would just layer it into his fucking comedy. And you're just like, fuck, this is heavy. And you're like, oh shit, George Carlin was fucking right. Like, he was so right. I think there are ways to look at that parasitic energy. And then it's, how am I participating in that? Mm-hmm. Right. Ultimately, what we're teaching, when we work with clients is like, hey man, you're holding the steering wheel. You can't see it in your hands, but you've had the fucking steering wheel your whole life. And as soon as you recognize that allows for some different perspective on what's transpired in your life and gotten you to where you are. But remember, you still have the fucking steering wheel, right? You decide where this thing goes. And I think that takes a great deal of responsibility. And Trudell talks about that. It's about remembering our responsibility, what we are, who we are, our relation to the earth. And with that, what responsibilities do we have? And I think there's an important piece to that, because, even like you get into certain airy-fairy things like gene keys. I love it. I interviewed Richard Rudd, a phenomenal guy, and he talks a lot about how this stage of, this may be true, maybe total hocus pocus, but for this stage of humanity, it's about moving away from the victim archetype. Like, we've had it long enough. We're going to transcend this now, right? What does that require? That requires actually going fucking heads up with the victim archetype. It requires, you look at a lot of people in the world right now, and they're ringing the bell. This happened to me, right? Me Too movement, all these things. It doesn't take away from it actually happening. Fuck yeah. Both my mom and my wife were molested as kids. Like, that's a fucking real thing for years. So it's a very real thing, and it's a hard thing to grapple with. But at some point, when do you look down and say, oh shit, I've got the steering wheel. What do I want to do with that now? Right. And what is my duty here to how I show up in the world for myself and for those that I love? And the parasitic energy is a big one. I think that was Shervin Jaffariah, who's the founder of Symbiotica Supplements. He's awesome. He's a anthroposophical guy who studied Steiner in great detail. Highly recommend people check him out. He's got the podcast Wake the Fake Up. And he's a soul brother, like he's a dear friend, and just fucking detailed in on that. And Steiner had a lot on parasitic energy. He also, or parasitic energy, but he also talked quite a bit about, the differences of the darkness. At some point, Christianity lumped Satan in with the devil and Lucifer, and it all became one homogenized evil, right? Hasatan meant the opponent. Just meant the opponent. And that could have been used for anybody. It didn't mean some guy in a fucking red dress with a pitchfork. But Lucifer was very different than Hasatan or Ahriman. And Ahriman, which comes from Zoroastrian understanding back in ancient Persia, is a completely different force, of darkness, if you will. And Paul Chek did a 5-hour deep dive on this with both of his wives that really breaks down what these are and the principle of the Christ, not as Jesus, but as the principle of Christ consciousness as the centering middle path and the way through it all. Steiner knew this shit over 100 years ago. He was predicting what's happening right now, right? It's insane. He spoke about biodynamic farming over 100 years ago. He didn't create it. He spoke to how we live in right relation with the land and what that looked like. Since he's died, we've about 100 years of looking at this. What does it actually look like to farm biodynamically? It's a great study. You look back on that and like, who was doing it this way? And you're like, holy shit. It's orders of magnitude greater than organic, which is orders of magnitude greater than conventional, right? But it is to organic what organic is to conventional. That's how much higher biodynamics is. So it's been a deep dive for me getting into Steiner's work. And he has, a lot of his books are just recorded lectures that he did. He had one on the nature of Ahriman. And I think, speaking of that, the parasitic energy, there are parasites and there's vampiric energy. There's all this shit. And at the same time, the hard part, the self-reflection piece, in Dispelling Wetiko by Paul Levy, the self-reflection piece is where I look back down and I say, fuck. I drove right over to that parasite and said, what's that like? I drove right to the vampire. I said, come into my house. Right. So really understanding that there's nothing that we're powerless to. Yeah. Not the government, not the deep state, not any of this shit. There's absolutely nothing that we're powerless to. Do we have boundaries and rules to play within currently that should be extinguished? Fuck yeah. It's our job to extinguish them. It's our job to write the new constitution, to build the new world. It's our job to steer the ship. And that's always been the case. And that's why we see, that the ancient time-tested good versus evil, divide and conquer, any of these things that you've heard throughout history, they still apply right now. One of the cool things that I like, and I'll shut the hell up on this rant, but one of the things that I like when you do shadow work and things like that, and people are, that's a big phrase, everyone's into, hey, I'm doing shadow work. I went to this Vipassana and yada, yada. The shadow is inherently anything that's not in your purview. It means you can't fucking see it. You have blinders on. You don't know where your fucking shadow is. You don't know what it is. You have no idea what it is, right? How do you do shadow work then if you can't see it, can't smell it, don't know how it exists, right? Other people can see it in you, and we can see it in other people, but we can't see it in ourselves. There's a little trick that you can do, and I found this out. I had a great teacher of mine, Mary Margrave, who told me, she's like, read King, Warrior, Magician, Lover once through. Go back through King, Warrior, Magician, Lover and track every time you were in one of these shadow archetypes. And what's cool is the ego will not interfere with you in the past, because that's not you. That was you in the past. So you can actually see where you showed up in shadow in relationships, at your job, in different aspects of your life. And if you can track a pattern, odds are that pattern is possibly still alive in you now, right? And that can give you a starting place when you want to work on your own shadow. I think the same applies on a global level. If we look back throughout recorded history, and we're seeing this now again with the big push for collectivism. And many great people, my brother Mark Gober, who wrote The End Upside Down Liberty, fantastic fucking book. Another great one called The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose. Your fans, all your listeners would eat these books up. They're incredible. Both on Audible. They're speaking to a fundamental way of understanding the world differently, right? And they're also speaking to how heinous shit has been on repeat. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I think we're at a stage right now where we have the choice of allowing it to rhyme or saying, let's take a different path. And that requires us looking at ourselves, what patterns are emerging there. And it requires us looking at society as a whole and saying, when the whole thing went collective, what happened, right? What happened in socialist Russia? What happened in communist Germany? What happened in these times? How many people died from Mao Zedong? How many people died from these different great leaders who wanted to fight for the farmer and wanted to fight for the little guy? What does that actually look like when it pans all the way out, right? Millions and millions and millions of people die in the worst possible way, like countries, governments starving their own people. And I think a lot of people that have grown up here, it's hard to imagine with all of our gifts and all of the surplus of anything that I want at my fingertips, it's hard to imagine a government acting in that way. And yet at the same time, for those of us that know, you can't unsee it. That's exactly the way pieces, not all of our government, but very large pieces of our government are behaving that way. And And again, that can freak you the fuck out and say, well, what do I do with that? I'm just one person. Or you can say, I got the steering wheel in my hand. And if enough of us recognize that, and we do know the patterns of the past, and we do know the patterns of ourselves, and we do our own inner work as the center of our own monad, if we can see that doesn't have an impact that reverberates through the totality of consciousness, as above, so below, there's power in that. And if enough of us do that, we shape what's going to happen next.
Well, that was good. Yeah, it's interesting the way that you kind of laid that out right there, and how important it is to recognize that we do have our hands on the wheel. One of the things that I recognize in healthcare is that as people recognize the hands are on the wheel, that they're actually controlling where this car is going, they start to recognize the power of self-love, which isn't taught. Like we have to kind of circle up to or back to that part. Self-preservation. Also see that the excuses and the obstacles just start to disappear. And then we see this oneness and this wholeness, and almost as if you pull this curtain back and see this entire new light of what life could be or should be, or whatever you want to call it here. So fantastic. All right. I want to shift one more gear here for you. Let's talk about your farm. So, we've gone generations. So I remember growing up, everybody in the neighborhood had some type of a garden, everybody. And you grow up, like I can remember some of my fondest times going to the backyard. My dad, we had to go kind of down this mountainside, and then he would bring a thing of salt with him. And we would literally pick green beans or tomatoes, salt, spit on them, wash them off, throw some salt on there and eat them. And then it was almost as if for 2, 3, 4 decades, backyard farms disappeared. Like there was no more gardens, there was nothing. Now we see this evolving. And I know that you have taken this or you're involved in a whole nother level. Tell me a little about what you got going. I think I've shared with you a little bit. My wife and I are dabbling for the very same consciousness in the thought, what if I had to feed myself? What if I was responsible for me and my family, my extended family? What could I do for people? And how hard or how easy it is, because it's not necessarily hard, but I bet you'd say the same thing. I fucking love it. Like I love being out there with nature. I feel as home and at peace there as probably anywhere else that I have in my life. So share with me a little bit about the farm.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to tackle there. I mean, I think you nailed it at the end there. Like it is something that Tucker talked about this at the end of our podcast. He said, if I'm wrong 20 years from now and no shit hits the fan, it's all smooth sailing, we find ourselves in this utopian paradise. Was I wrong to teach my kids survival skills? Was I wrong to teach them how to field dress an animal or clean a fish? Was I wrong to immerse them in nature? Was I wrong to teach them how to build fire? Was I wrong to let them grow up outdoors? Fuck no. There's no, not at all. Not at all. You know that is only a positive. And we've had a lot of fortune in that we've gotten some donations. We've had a lot of donations from Aubrey Marcus, who's a big, one of my best friends and my brother, and somebody that I've worked with closely over the years. On it first and now at Fit for Service. And, we're so close. It's just one of those things. I just kept talking to him like, man, we got to get this. And so we did. It's a 118-acre farm out in Lockhart, which isn't huge. But, talking to guys like Daniel Firth Griffith, who is an amazing guy. He's going to teach a seminar early September. I don't know what this comes out, but early September at our farm, Gardeners of Eden.earth. He's going to be teaching all about regenerative agriculture. And he lives kind of in the cuts in Virginia. So this will be at our farm, just 30 minutes south of Austin, which is great. But that's, we've leaned anybody that I learned from who spent 30 years or 20 years or 50 years doing this thing. I want to stand on the shoulders of giants, right? And I also want to relay that back to people like, hey, if I've got access to this great guy due to my podcast or due to Aubrey or due to our ability to reach people, I want to share that person. I want to blow him up. I've had him on my podcast 2 or 3 times. He's just a exceptional human. And, one of the things you find when you start diving into nature is there's more than one way to skin a cat, but there's also, PhD level shit, in all these different respects, from biodynamics from Steiner. That's one course. Alan Savory and regenerative agriculture. There's another course. Sepp Holzer and permaculture. There's another course, right? So we've been very fortunate to find great folks that have been taking the deep dive in some of these different avenues and pooling those things together. So what makes us unique is that, we have 1,000 plants in the ground and we have a 400 fruit and nut tree food forest that's done from a Sepp Holzer design. Chad Johnson came out and did that with us. And And so we are standing on, the shoulders of Sepp Holzer when it comes to that. We've had Daniel walk our land, and we've been to his land, and he's going to be teaching on our land. And we're rotating, a couple dozen cows with about 70 sheep and 6 livestock guardians. And that's who's regenerating the land right now for us with our help and mobile fencing and all that stuff. So, there's so much to it. It could be like, I had Joe Salatin on the podcast, and he said 1.5 million people have become homesteaders in the last 2 years, which is awesome. And at the same time, a lot of them are like, okay, now what? What the fuck, dude? I don't know how to make this work, right? You're like, hey, the only person on our farm who had farming experience is my wife. Nobody else had farming experience, So what do we do now? Even if you do have access to the greats, what happens when things go wrong? And I think what's beautiful about it is it's almost like sparring, right? If I fuck up in meditation and find myself rabbit holing thoughts for 18 minutes, and I only get to meditate for 2 of the 18 or the 20 minutes, there's no consequence for that other than I didn't get into a deep meditation, right? If I fuck up in sparring, I'm going to get dinged for it. We put 50 sheep out on the land without any livestock guardians and lost 6 in one night to the coyotes. We thought our 8-foot game fence was going to keep them out, so it was like, there's some rookie mistakes that have very real consequences. And, and then spending up night after night, we were out there for a month with night vision goggles on and fucking thermals and ARs waiting to hunt them. And the coyotes they're brilliant. They stay just behind the tree line where you can't see, trees have their own infrared, and they'd be howling, talking shit to us, and never got to even take a shot on a coyote. And then, we got a couple of dogs. We took that night off. We lost 7 more that night.
Oh, shit.
Right. So 2 dogs wasn't enough. So that's why we ended up going with 7. And now we got 6 because one of them didn't make it, but we haven't lost anything since then. Right. So it was like, these are hard learning curves. One of our pumps went down. We have a solar pump, and one of the pumps went down. We lost 50 trees last summer. Thankfully, they were still under warranty. We got them replaced, but that's a quarter of our food forest. It's a big deal. And the food forest is going to take 7 years to actually really produce, right? It's got to form the canopy. It's got to grow big. It's got to be able to protect its fruit from the sun. It's not there yet. It's in its infancy. It's like a little toddler now, like it takes a lot of care for these things. But I think it really boils down to, what do you care about? Like, what do I want to eat? I love eggs. I love it. And I love the best eggs, so let's get some hens. How do we protect those hens? We got emus, we got donkeys. Some of them do good things. Some of them don't do good things. How can we change that up? So it's, there's a constant evolution taking place. And depending on how you go to, they're going to have this one cookie cutter pattern for you, but you'll have to apply that to your land and your environment. You'll have to see how good that works there. A lot of people go down to Costa Rica. They spend 6 months doing permaculture where you can fart a seed out and it grows a tree. And they go to somewhere where it freezes and they're like, oh, it doesn't work the same. I don't have the same soil here. Something's off, and they can't put it together. I think that's why Holzer was so brilliant, because Holzer was able to set up, his book, Desert of Paradise. He set up these oases in the Saharan desert. He's at 6,000 feet elevation in Austria at the base of the Alps. And he's got citrus trees growing outside, not in a greenhouse, right? He doesn't cover them in the wintertime. He's changed the microclimate where he lives to a degree where he can literally grow anything he wants. So I think when we look at things like that, where have they applied the skill set? How does it work, in my land versus other lands? How does that translate, into different areas of the earth? And just trying based on what we want, like we lost some chickens and it sucks. We raised them all at our house in our backyard in Austin. We had named them like we knew when Sunshine died. We knew when Bengali, our rooster, died. We know these things. The kids know them. And it's an ever unfolding evolution of how we work with them. And also the very real, like Nature is Metal is a great account on Instagram, because it shows you like nature's raw as fuck. Like there is an element of this, and everything eats everything. It's like the Ouroboros, like there's a spiritual understanding of that. There's a very real physical understanding of that. And I don't hate the coyotes that they wanted to eat. I don't hate them at all. And I'm happy I didn't get to kill any of them. It turns out having livestock guardians that prevent them from eating is better than going out and hunting them, because you can kill 90% of that pack and the females will immediately go into estrus and they'll generate more, right? They're really a work of art when you consider what the coyotes can do. So thinking about all that and learning all that stuff, it's it's challenging and it's hard, but it's very real. And I think that's one of the best things about it, because there's an authenticity to it. There's a realness to it. It matters, it matters the decisions I make, because other lives are depending on me to make correct decisions. And whether I'm going to eat that animal or whether I'm just going to use its eggs, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I'm providing it its space for life. And does that space look good? Are they happy? Do they enjoy their lives before they go? How do they die as well? You can have the best quality meat on the planet, but if it's USDA certified, that means it got shipped to a factory and held in the dark for 3 nights. Before it died, it was standing in its own urine next to not its family, but a bunch of animals it doesn't know. Its whole body was clamped, and then No Country for Old Men, thunk right in the back of the head. That's a scary fucking way to die. If I think of that happening to me, that's fucking scary. Yeah. And if I think about, you don't want to eat a scared animal. We know this from hunting, right? Everything I get in the store then has that story. Doesn't matter how it was raised. I mean, it does matter how it was raised from a regenerative standpoint, but at the end of the day, I'm eating that nervousness. I'm eating that adrenaline dump. I'm eating all these things. So the very best way, as it turns out, is to kill an animal while it's hanging with his family with a mouthful of food. And that's the last thing it sees, the last thing it knows. There's no fear. It's just there. It's hanging with its family. It happens so quickly. The rest of the herd is kind of uncertain. They come by, they notice their friend, their family members down. They pay their respects depending on what pack or what herd it is. And they move on, and then you honor that animal and you field dress that animal, and you're hands on with all the things that go into it. And I realize a lot of people aren't there yet when it comes to that, but even participating in that one time, whether you witness it or whether you get your hands dirty, that's going to have an impact on your relationship with food. And I think that's one of the most important things that we've forgotten as a culture. You watch Food Inc., everything just shows up in this nice, neat package. Steak is steak. It's not cattle. It's not a cow, right? It's not pork chops or pork chops. They're not a pig, and how did that pig live, right? You think of all the different cuts and how they're made. And it's like, well, this was a thing. It was a living being. How do I honor that living being and take that living being to honor me? Because life takes life.
Wow. Not too long ago, I had Will Harris from White Oaks.
White Oak Pasture.
Yeah, and wonderful information there. And he talked in depth about the complexity of how everything matters, and everything, just like you're talking about your forest and, the water and all of those different things. Absolutely fantastic. So I love hearing they're doing it. And we're not in that level. So you have 100+ acres. My wife and I have about 30 acres and doing just the same thing. But I think in the message might be that everyone could do their little part. And depending on what your goal is, we have an organic cafe. So we were able to really start when we were trying to provide the absolute best food that we could for our community. We would call the purveyors. We would call every one of them. Is being advertised as, and it became very difficult for us to really get behind a lot of the food companies that were our only access to for the food in our cafe. So we decided, well, what could we do? What could we do on a small level? And we had a little property not too long ago, just about 30 acres. And now we have, 100+ hens, and we're learning the whole thing. And you're right. Like, you start to really think, if you give it time and you integrate with that, and you start to think about, are they happy? I know it sounds silly, but are my hens happy? Are they living the best eggs that I want them to love eggs? And they're all just starting to lay eggs now. So there's this together, we're like succeeding. It's like we're having these happy moments together, because we know there's an onslaught of eggs about to come. And, like now we'll get like a dozen a day, which is exciting. So to watch that and have that relationship that everything does matter. And then when we go into the grocery stores, we take so much for granted, I think, about it. The interesting thing to this all, Kyle, since this is a Health Made Simple podcast, is that same thing with the human body. How we move, how we eat, our thoughts, the labels we accept, the positions we put ourselves in, the information that we're downloading, it all matters. It all matters. And I think back to your conversation a little bit earlier, if we just get back to the foundations, the 4 different conversations for anyone at any time in their life, but getting back to the foundations of how really, quite frankly, simple. I think, I don't know if it's easy, but becomes easy as you kind of accept it and want what it makes available for us. All right. So you talked a little bit about, I know you have a fit for service program. Tell me a little about some of the things you got coming up. They sound pretty exciting. So did I just hear that you're having an event at the farm where you are basically going to teach everyone the deep download of all of these different things?
Yeah, I mean, well, we have a couple of different things. One, the farm, gardenersofeden.earth is the website. We're on Instagram. That's where anything farm related will take place. You know, we've got events with Chad Johnson that are on permaculture exclusively. This will be a 5-day event with Daniel Griffith that's going to really deep dive Savory's work and how you regenerate the land, how you change the soil, the health of the animals, everything in between that. And so there are separate categories, that we'll have different events for. And then we'll have really small events like a cheese making workshop with this guy, Joaquin, who's 3rd generation Venezuelan cheesemaker, fucking awesome guy. We'll do field dressing with a buddy of ours that does all the field dressing events or all the field harvest events for Rome Ranch, and Force of Nature. He's become a good buddy, Jared Holmes. He's going to come out and we'll break down an animal together. We'll kill the animal, we'll pray for the animal, break the whole thing down. And the next day we'll make pemmican with it. We'll take a different animal that's been dry aged for a few weeks and we'll make our own pemmican, Native American beef jerky with what we have on the land, our own honey, our own berries, our own herbs. And we'll figure out how do we preserve this so we can eat it and have it, in refrigeration or in a root cellar for up to 2 years. Right. So that's a cool thing to know, how to extend the life of these things. And then Fit for Service is basically where we take a deep dive into how we shift consciousness, and it's all legal ways. Like we're not doing plant medicines at the events, but breath work, holotropic breathing, shamanic breathing. We did our first sweat lodge. We have a beautiful medicine woman from Ecuador that came up and poured sweat for us. They're transformative experiences, even ecstatic dance. Like how do I move this fucking weirdness through my body so I don't feel weird? How do I actually literally lean into the sticky spots in my body so that I don't have sticky spots in my body and I can move more freely and I can feel more comfortable in my own skin. Lots of these things, and it's a lot of it too. If you're listening to this right now and you're like, I don't fuck ecstatic dance. Like, what is that? Some weird shit, it's like, that's what I thought. That's exactly what I thought. And right, there's a part of you that's saying, fuck that thing because it doesn't want to let go of the tightness. It doesn't want to move through the sticky part. It doesn't want to face that stuff. But if you do, that can have a tremendous impact on you. And so, we're in year 5 of Fit for Service now. We basically have a year-long program that people can sign up for. So check that out, fitforservice.com. One thing we do every year that doesn't require the year-long membership is called Arcadia. And it's a festival. It's a festival for the more beautiful worlds our hearts know is possible. And we've had Charles Eisenstein at our events, Jamie Wheel, Zach Bush, Robert Edward Grant, some of the greatest thinkers. Del Bigtree's coming to this one. That'll be in Vegas early November. It's just 3 days long. It's music from some of the best artists on the planet. It's artwork. It's lectures from guys like myself on different aspects of regenerative to health and wellness. And it's some of these great minds that are really tracking, how is it that we come together in a way where we have this shared horizon of what's coming and we all know our part. We all know the part that we're going to play and how we shift the world and take it to the more beautiful world. And we get to have that experience together, which is really important. Festivals, for time immemorial have meant something to us as culture because it allows us to take off the mask or put the mask on and be someone different for a little while. It also allows us to break out of our daily routine, like Joe Dispenza, breaking the habit of being yourself. That happens at the festival. You break the habit of being yourself. You crack yourself wide open. And from that, you accept new information. You bring this stuff in. And then how do I take that back home with me now? And I think Arcadia is going to be incredible. We had 1,300 people last year. We're going to do 5,000 tickets this year. Wow. It'll be at Area 15. We've got a large layout, multiple stages, multiple speakers, and I couldn't be more ecstatic about that. And that's just fitforservice.com/Arcadia with a K.
Wow, that sounds amazing, especially if that many people with the like consciousness in one section. Wow, incredible. All right, incredible. I don't want to hold you up anymore. Kyle, thank you for being here. If you haven't already, folks, follow Kyle at Kyle Kingsbury, his podcast. It's where there's incredible interviews. And do you have a website or anything like that?
I don't do much with my website, but it does exist. I think it's kingsboo.com. Okay. At Living with the Kingsburys on Instagram and at Kingsboo, KINGSBU on Twitter. That's where people can get a hold of me.
Well, brother, I appreciate you coming here today. I appreciate your time, just dropping a wealth of knowledge and just diving so deep into it in such a quick fashion. I know I was putting you on the spot for a lot of that. So appreciate you, love you. And I would say this, the more that you can keep doing what you're doing, this world's going to be a better place as a result of it. Kyle, you're a great man. Keep doing your thing. And I hope that your journey only brings you greater success.
Amazing, brother. Thank you so much, Bart. I'll have you on my podcast as well, brother.
Beautiful. Appreciate you, man.
Take care.